Welcome, everybody, to the April 23rd, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine. So let's start off with the news. As many of you know, yesterday there was a shooting in Tennessee at a Waffle House by a man who had had a gun confiscated from him in the past. However, he also had the gun given back to his father, who then gave the weapon back to his kid. This man then went on a rampage in which he killed 4 people. Luckily, a man was able to tackle him and get the gun out of his hands, therefore possibly stopping him from killing even more. Of course, that man is a hero. The hero who stopped this shooting was a man named James Shaw Jr., who I, again, consider a great man. The man who shot the place to begin with is named Travis J. Reekling, I think is how you pronounce that. Reen King? I'm going to say Reen King because I think that's how it's... However, what most of the media is not talking about is Reen King's connections, specifically that he was a subscriber to the Sovereign Citizens Movement. If you do not know what they are a branch of the Tea Party movement that does not recognize the federal government as existing. They believe the highest authority is local government. In fact, Travis even killed people specifically due to this notion and had a gun confiscated for him or from him because he tried to enter the White House, which is trespassing. So this sounds like an act of right-wing terrorism, correct? Well, that's not how it's being defined by the mainstream media. Even the so-called liberal news sources are not mentioning Travis's connection to the Sovereign Citizens Movement, which really goes to show you where they stand on things. Because, I don't know, I guess terrorist attacks are only done by Muslims. Although, even if that were true, that would prove people like mine's point, considering how Islam is an extremely far-right ideology, but, you know, I digress. While we're on the topic of the media, CNN released this article on Friday. Exclusive. YouTube ran ads from hundreds of brands of extreme channels. This is again from CNN Money, on which what they are more or less arguing is that, well, I'll just let them explain it. Ads from over 300 companies and organizations, including tech giants, major retailers, newspapers, and government agencies, ran on YouTube channels promoting white nationalist, Nazi, pedophilia, conspiracy theory, and North Korean propaganda. A CNN investigation has found. Now, first they name drop some people like Black Pigeon Speaks, who I will agree is a Nazi. And InfoWars, who I wouldn't call a Nazi, but I would call in that territory, he's definitely, I don't know if I'd call him a racist even, he's more just an idiot. However, at one point, they dropped the name of a certain liberal commentator quite a few of you may be aware of. From the article, ads also appeared on the Jimmy Dore Show channel, a far-left YouTube channel that peddles conspiracy theories such as the idea that the Syrian chemical weapons attacks are hoaxes. May I remind you, at the time of recording, the U.S. government has not done an investigation in Assad's connection to the chemical weapons attack. But they still bombed Syria over it. And Secretary of Defense James Mattis has admitted that Assad had no connection to the previous chemical weapons attack. And yet Jimmy Dore is some sort of crazy conspiracy theorist for saying, wait, shouldn't we do an investigation first? But for that matter, I like the use of the term conspiracy theory. I mean, give Jimmy Dore this. He never peddled the conspiracy theory that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. You know, the one that led to a very long war, billions of dollars wasted, a rise of ISIS, essentially giving Iraq to Iran because they installed Maliki in there, etc., etc. So CNN, you want to play this game? Well, okay then. But for that matter, why is CNN going after the Jimmy Dore show? I thought they were liberal. Well, the truth is, CNN is not a liberal news network, nor is it even an objective news network. It's an establishment news network. Of course, Jimmy Dore did a great takedown of this article, link to that below. And now, time to move on to our next story. Apparently, the Democratic Party does not want us to forget about the 2016 election. I really can't for the life of me figure out why they don't, considering how it was a complete failure for them. But here you go. Democratic Party files suit alleging Russia, the Trump campaign, and WikiLeaks conspired to disrupt the 2016 election. Now, of course, their proof of this is that the Russian government supposedly gave the information about how the DNC was more or less rigging the primaries against Bernie Sanders to WikiLeaks, and therefore that caused some people to not want to vote for Hillary Clinton. However, may I just point out how the Democratic Party is speaking out of both sides of its mouth when it comes to this issue? So one minute they're saying, oh no, it's bad that they know we rigged the election, and then they go into court, which they have done, and say it is their constitutional right under the First Amendment to rig the primaries as they are a private corporation, which to be fair, they are correct on. However, if it is your constitutional right, why is it a bad thing that Russia is simply pointing out how you expressed your constitutional right? Isn't Russia supposed to be a dictatorship? And if that's the case, may I ask, isn't it a good thing they know we have rights like that here? I'm seriously asking because trying to wrap my head around this Russian nonsense is getting harder and harder as every single day goes on, especially when you consider it's pretty much the only campaign issue many of the 2018 Democrats are campaigning on in the midterm election. So, what I'm more or less saying is, okay, you can do that. It's not really going to work, but I guess you can do that. I think we should end this episode by making fun of some right-wing media. Many of you are aware of the Daily Wire. It's Ben Shapiro's website. I've talked about it a couple times before. Well, they recently reported on Bernie Sanders rolling out a plan to guarantee that every American has a job. This plan would include massive infrastructure spending, similar to what we saw in the New Deal, which, may I remind you guys, was a success. However, what did the people at the Daily Wire do? Well, they looked at the most superficial details possible. Allow me to read. Weirdly, the plan also includes dividing the country into 12 separate districts within the United States, each with a specialized area of industry, that would develop service projects and major infrastructure job plans, which they would then forward to the Department of Labor for approval. Sanders and his staff weirdly did not seem to notice that their draft guarantee program was pulled straight from the dystopian Hunger Games novels. Okay, one, aren't these the same people who say we need the Electoral College because people's needs are different depending on what area they're in and people's wants are different? So dividing up a country into 50 different states is fine, but then dividing that up into 12 different districts, that's not fine. And for that matter, weren't these the same people who say, oh, leftists, they only read Harry Potter, they only compare Donald Trump to fiction? And by the way, I do think people who unironically compare Donald Trump to Dumbledore for someone else from Harry Potter are being silly. I want to make that clear. However, then I don't go around and compare Bernie Sanders' plan to the Hunger Games. But it gets even worse. It's more possible that Sanders' team got the idea from early economic plans for the USSR, which divided Russia and surrounding nations into 11 separate economic districts. China has undertaken similar efforts. So essentially, everything I don't like is communism. You know, there was that law, Godwin's Law. It's extremely idiotic, by the way. But it says that essentially if you mention Hitler on the internet, you lose instantly. However, for anyone who believes in that, I'd recommend that you create a law specifically for communism, too, because then that debunks, like, every conservative article. And then I don't even really need to do my job anymore. But let's continue. The draft plan did not include information on how quickly Sanders' hypothetical administration would begin developing a program where the children from each of the 12 districts murder each other. Yeah, they're doing the Hunger Games reference again. It's not really funny, but they think it is, so I'll just let them keep going. That's another thing I notice about Daily Wire a lot. They like to pretend they're funny. They aren't. Conservatives are. I'm just going to say this. Conservatives, you aren't funny. Emily Zanotti, the writer of this article, you aren't funny. Okay? But here's what else. It also does not apparently include information on how Sanders and his team plan to combat the I can barely pronounce this. Distornary, I think is how it's pronounced. Distornary effect a guaranteed job program would have on the American economy, but Bernie Sanders has never been one for details. And one, they keep implying that, or at least they're sort of subtly implying it under the curtains, that Bernie Sanders is going to go to your house, point a gun to your head, and say, you're going to have to work, which, on a side note, let's face it, these people would support. You know, I'm just saying. Yeah, it's a guaranteed job if you want to get a job, which most people would. And then, that means that those people get money, which they can spend, and that goes back into the economy. This isn't very complicated. They then talk about how Gillibrand and Booker have proposed similar plans, and end with another Hunger Games joke, by the way, which still isn't funny. But you see, this goes to show you the dishonest tactics. Because now, what are they doing? They're comparing it to a dystopian future. Which I think is an intellectually dishonest thing to do. You can disagree with Bernie Sanders' policy, mind you, but comparing it to an actual dystopia, I consider at least to be very intellectually dishonest. But I don't know, that's just me. I'm Ephrom, and good night.